Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about Something Wicked This Way Comes from 1983. And this is the winner of my Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge to my Patreon, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Something Wicked This Way Comes is an interesting place in Walt Disney history. This is a Walt Disney movie, by the way, in that this is a horror film for family audiences. Between this and the film The Watcher in the Woods, Disney was really trying to rebrand and not sure exactly where to go in the early to mid 80s until Michael Eisner came over. This time Disney wasn't sure where to go. They had lost Walt. It took them a few kind of weird transitional years to sort of figure out where exactly they were going to go. And it's an interesting idea to do family kind of G or PG horror films, in that most of the time we think of horror now, we think of gore, we think of scares, which feels like that's not appropriate for children. Horror sort of gets a bad rap in terms of things you can watch with a family. I grew up watching actually the Universal monster movies like Dracula, Frankenstein, things of that nature. I was not allowed to see like the Friday the 13th and the Halloweens and stuff. And those make great like family movie night kind of family friendly movies. I think this falls in line with that, but that doesn't mean it's not scary. That doesn't mean it's not spooky. That doesn't mean it's not unnerving. And Something Wicked This Way Comes has that uneasy, creepy, spooky feeling going on all throughout it. It didn't feel like I was watching, like when I say a G-rated horror movie, you'll think of something that's on Freeform, or what did they have, 31 Days of Halloween or something like that. Like Hocus Pocus, like very like, doesn't feel that scary. It's not really going to freak you out. A horror fan's not going to like it. I think Something Wicked This Way Comes actually is a horror film that a horror fan would be interested in. It's thought-provoking, it's weird, it's surreal, it's odd. It was written by Ray Bradbury. There's enough to go in there with it that you can sort of meet it halfway. I don't think this is a perfect movie. I didn't grow up, I mean, I could have grown up with it. It was released the year I was born, and I'm not sure exactly why I didn't see this until now, basically, which is one of the things that made me excited that it won the movie review vote, is because I had never seen this, and I have always been curious about this weird era. And even I've always heard a lot of like artists and a lot of people always get really interested in like The Watcher in the Woods and the Something Wicked This Way Come kind of era. Black Cauldron, I guess you could put in there, where Disney was like, well, what if we do teen things? Because one of the big successes of Star Wars is that teens were buying movie tickets in droves. Porky's, which was a big hit in the early 80s, also showed that as well. The buying power of the teenager was in full force in the early 80s, and making something that could appeal to a younger demographic but an older demographic at that time seemed like, you know, something that made financial sense in the early 80s. I don't necessarily think Disney knew how to do that. They made some like more interesting films. It's one thing you can say about Disney as a studio is like when they're having these transitional times, they usually make, they're not bad movies or good movies, they're at least interesting, like things like Dinosaur, things like this, where you're like, I mean, I don't think most studios would have even attempted something like this. They would have been like, that seems too difficult and weird, but Disney's like, no, we'll take this on and this will work, and it doesn't, but you're like kind of with it. Although I think this film works better than Dinosaur, I will say that. In a small town in Greentown, Illinois, a carnival comes one night in the autumn. It's an autumn night and they can tell a storm is brewing. And this carnival's come to whisk the small town away and show them all these delights and things, but suddenly starts to make ironic deals with everyone, making a school teacher who is old very young and beautiful, but then she is blind, making the barber who wants to see exotic women kind of seduced by belly dancers, but then turned into the bearded lady. And these two kids who have really cool names, Will Holloway and Jim Nightshade, which if no one's made a band out of that, that's a missed opportunity. Know what's going on, know that evil is afoot, but Mr. Dark, played by Jonathan Pryce, who is running the carnival, is after them and trying to stop them from eventually taking over the town and ruining and ironically twisting all these people and giving all these people ironic twists to their dreams, and hopefully trying to stop him before he ruins more people's lives. This film, and much like The Watcher in the Woods, had a lot of production problems and post-production problems, and The Watcher in the Woods probably had a worse time of it, having that actually been released, then pulled back, then re-edited, then released again a year later. Something Wicked This Way Comes did get re-edited, rescored, reshot at a certain point, They did a lot of editing, including cutting out a sequence which would have been the first time CGI was used in a Hollywood production, but they decided to cut that because they didn't like the look of it. Same with like alternative sequences that they cut. I don't know if Disney made like a really good Blu-ray of Something Wicked This Way Comes, but goddamn, like those sound like cool sequences, and you should have probably got on that at this point. And Disney was kind of going through a transitional period. They were trying to make films with more mature themes. They had seen Time Bandits and Dark Crystal be hits for other studios, and even Star Wars to a certain degree. I mean, most of the special effects departments were working for them on films, family type of films. The fact that, you know, other studios and other filmmakers were doing that was probably a little upsetting, so they wanted to do something different, and Something Wicked This Way Comes probably felt that way. I think through all the weird editing and reshoots and things, sometimes you can tell the kids are definitely older. The thing with kids is you shoot anything with a kid 1 month and then the next month and you can tell they've aged. Like, kids age rather quickly, and so I could tell in some sequences I was like, what happened? Did they get aged by Mr. Dark or something? Oh no, this is just reshoots. But it gives it kind of a weird vibe in that I think this film's interesting in a lot of ways. It's probably more of an interesting film, but it's kind of like an interesting, odd, kind of weird subsection that you can also watch with anybody. Whereas, like, I think this is a good story. The whole idea of this story, Something Wicked This Way Comes, I mean, it was originally pitched as a script to Gene Kelly to be a directorial effort. Then that didn't happen, and Ray Bradbury made it into a book, adapted his script into a book, and then adapted his book into a script. Spielberg was interested in doing it. Sam Peckinpah was interested in doing it. But eventually, Jack Clayton did it, who also directed The Innocents. So he has some cred. It has a classical kind of gothic storytelling sense to it. Feels so classic. It feels like a story that's always been there. Rick and Morty even had an episode making fun of someone granting ironic wishes and things like that. With Something Wicked This Way Comes, the interesting way they adapted it, and maybe this is because of the reshoots, maybe it's the way they directed it, but it doesn't feel like it's really playing on the ironic twists as much. Like, certainly that's what you're going to remember about it, but it almost felt like this was more about being a mood piece than really getting on the ironic twists or anything like that. Twilight Zone in itself likes to be more about its plot, and although it could be very moody at the same time, this seemed like it took more of the mood angle than that, really, and probably played in that mood and that feeling of unnervy autumnness than I'd ever seen. You know, in terms of mood, this might get like kind of the creepy, unnerving change feeling of autumn than I've ever seen anything ever really do. But I think that's something that was done by a score. You know, James Horner wasn't the original person who did the score. They rescored it. This film became more than the sum of its parts, and the sum of its parts were always changing. So it's kind of remarkable it becomes kind of the thing it is. You know, you don't see a lot of studio films that get mangled and changed up, and you're like, this is kind of like an interesting example of itself somehow. The flow of it changes, how it'll be very literary and feel very close to its source material, and then other times it'll feel like, you know, they're kind of sort of doing their own thing that Disney wanted, but it seems to oddly work, which is like highly remarkable, frankly. I could honestly see, and I don't want to upset anyone, but I could honestly see them doing another film version of this and it playing more in kind of the straight ahead plot way and less in like the moody kind of creepy way, and being able to have both versions and you'll be able to appreciate both versions. I think there's room to actually do that, but this is still a good movie. Something Wicked This Way Comes plays in the horror way that I think, you know, I was thinking about this, and I have never seen Watcher in the Woods, interestingly enough, but I was thinking about, you know, I would like to show horror movies to my kids, but not, you know, like Friday the 13th is not appropriate for a while. But I think at the same time, something like this is good to show and creepy and has the imagery and everything, has a more moral lessons to it that I think, you know, oftentimes even a horror movie that's fun might have moral lessons that you don't necessarily agree with. I do think some of the morals in these are a little dicey though, because I don't necessarily agree with like, okay, everyone wants to be young again, but the twist is she can't see. That one, fine. But then like the barber who gets changed into the bearded lady, like, so like no one will really date him. We don't know why. Like, we don't know if he's like sexually assaulted people or he's just a creep or he's like sleazy or something. We just know he likes like exotic women, probably because most of that town has probably rejected him, maybe been mean to him. I don't know, but it just felt like a little like mean. It's like, you know, there's ironic fates, but then there's just times you're being a dick, Mr. Dark. Did he really need to turn into the bearded lady? I feel like, you know, he was just very lonely. I don't think, anyway, I'm just saying I thought that was too far. I do like the kind of weird atmospheric nature to it. It seems like a thing things that take place in autumn, much like Over the Garden Wall, have this very purgatory-esque vibe where I'm not exactly sure what year this film takes place in. It just feels like the past, and like, you know, and you have this carnival coming in autumn, like these strange odd occurrences, but people will go with them because the natural flow of the autumn. It's like I love that kind of feel to it. You know, Over the Garden Wall might be the greatest piece of autumn media ever made. It's definitely high up there. I'm sure, you know, someone will be like, well, what about this thing? But Something Wicked This Way Comes definitely is like higher up there in terms of getting the feel of the season. I really like Jonathan Pryce, who originally was not Ray Bradbury's first choice or anyone's first choice. They really wanted like a Christopher Lee or a Peter O'Toole, but Jonathan Pryce seems to be the actor that most people absolutely love for this. He's great as Mr. Dark, and I think he does a really great performance. He was honestly just cast to bring costs down because Christopher Lee and Peter O'Toole cost more. So that's entirely why. I still think he does a good performance regardless of that he clearly was cheaper. But the one performance I really actually like in this is Jason Robards, because there's a lot in this that he's an older father to one of the boys, and how he couldn't save him from drowning because he doesn't know how to swim and he has this weak heart and all this stuff. And I've never seen an actor play so much off of regret and knowledge of that he shouldn't do something, and he knows why he shouldn't do it, and that's all on Jason Robards' face. It's actually a pretty interesting introspective performance from Jason Robards in this. And when everyone's doing their ironic dreams and things like that, and he's refusing, you can tell in his face he wants to give in to that temptation. You can tell that he does not want to almost do the right thing. He wants to do the thing that he almost desires, but he knows that he can't let his son down. I think that's an interesting theme going on through this whole film that Jason Robards plays excellently well. Like, you wouldn't understand that theme without Robards' performance in this. And I think he does a lot in this film that doesn't play as big as Mr. Dark, doesn't play as big as the kids. He almost like decidedly made a decision to play his role differently from everyone else. And I think since everyone else has to play in these big moments to get certain things across, he understands his theme is a little more subtle, and the idea that he is an older father and he can't be the father he would like to be, and he wasn't really, you know, raised in a way that he could be the right father. Like, he feels like his heart condition, and the fact that he was never taught how to swim, and he is regretful about that, but he's regretful that he will do the same thing to his own son, is all in Jason Robards' performance, and he does such a great job in this. You know, it made me really appreciate him. I like when people do, in a big kind of big budget film, people do an interesting performance, because it feels like it's almost like a harder thing to do than do it in a quieter, you know, art movie or something, because you really like kind of have to really play into something to really, because there's so much going on, you really have to establish that theme or what part of the story you're telling as an actor. And I think someone like Jason Robards does that so amazingly well. It really, I think that's the underappreciated part of this film is Jason Robards, because he really he plays off that idea of not only being an older dad, but an older dad that wishes he could do more for his son and doesn't feel like he necessarily can. And I think that's something that plays into the idea that why these people would want these ironic wishes, why even maybe after they know, I don't think they knew before they were going to get them, but why they would take on these magical things that could possibly be evil is because they desire something that much. And without an actor or a character showing you why you would want that, other than, you know, vanity or something, it makes the want of that even more real, and what Mr. Dark is doing to them even more terrifying. Something Wicked This Way Comes is a great movie to watch with kids, despite what I just said. I think it is a great film to watch with kids because it's creepy, it's unnerving, it plays on themes, it plays on kind of moral themes, and makes you think about, like, I think its overall moral message is very tight and very good. But I also think Something Wicked This Way Comes, the kind of odd studio mangled film that has this just like deep, odd, strange horror feeling. And the early 80s were a big time for horror, and it's interesting that Disney went in this way. I think Something Wicked This Way Comes might be, it seems to be, depending on who you ask, it's either this or The Watcher in the Woods is everyone's favorite. I really did quite like this film. I do want to rewatch it with my daughter. I think it would be a cool movie to watch, but it's also like probably an interesting, odd, like kind of like something you'd see if you're going through an auteur's career, and if you're into that auteur you'd really love, but most people wouldn't. This is sort of like moody, like a film like The Fog plays that off excellently well. I think this doesn't do that kind of small ghost story thing as great as The Fog does, but it plays on that mood, that haunting mood of a horror film, that like when people Have you ever talked to someone who doesn't want to watch horror films? They're like, isn't that creepy and spooky and scary? And Something Wicked This Way Comes maybe gets on those notes that scares people about horror films before they've even seen any. But I think it does that so well. I really love Something Wicked This Way Comes, and I love what it does with this story. I don't think it's a straight-ahead adaptation of what Ray Bradbury is doing, and it really shows like what that story is necessarily trying to do. It's trying to play into the mood, and so much so, you know, Pam Grier and Diane Ladd are almost like just window dressing, although it's always lovely to see Pam Grier in anything. She was gorgeous but didn't have as much to do. This film kind of like lets go of certain things and just swallows them up within the piece of itself, and much like I think this film, like almost like the film itself, managed to truck along and be what it is despite all the, you know, being re-edited and rewritten and all the nonsense Disney was doing to it. It still managed to be its odd, kind of strange, you know, family friendly but also unnervingly creepy kind of horror self. And I think that's something that makes Something Wicked This Way Comes kind of like a really good horror autumn family film that you weren't expecting to be as interesting and successful as it really was. So if you have seen Something Wicked This Way Comes and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And this is the winner of the Patreon movie review vote. If you would like for me to review a movie of your choice, then click on the link below and pledge, and maybe I'll be reviewing your movie next month. Thank you very much for watching.